First of all, we're the last panel of the day, so everyone, I'm sure, is looking forward to the boat ride. I did want to say that we have the best-looking panel of this conference. We did want to, first of all, acknowledge, Toon for giving us this opportunity and throwing a great event. And I'm sure we'll see many of you at the boat ride today. I just wanted to go through our panel and have them self-introduce themselves. I'll start with Raquel.
Me? Hi, everybody. Thank you for hanging with us until the last panel. We'll try and make it as entertaining as possible, I guess. I'm Raquel. I work at Electronic Arts, heading up user acquisition for our mobile games.
My name is Leslie. I'm with Mosaic, which is the leading photo book app for iOS and Android. And I head mobile marketing, so everything from UA to retention and re-engagement programs, as well as product.
Hello, I am Jenny Crosby, and I'm from Intuit. I manage our affiliate programs for TurboTax and Quicken, as well as the mobile marketing, specifically for our apps, SnapTax and TurboTax for iPad. And very excited to be here, so thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Weston. I'm co-founder of Mobile UA Fellowship. We're the largest industry think tank in the space. All our events and membership are free. Actually, our next event is Tuesday at Casual Connect with Google overviewing their second half Android and Google Play strategy. I just wanted to thank Raquel specifically for jumping in on this panel. We had to replace someone who had some legal issues. The topic of the panel is, post-install, and we've changed the topic a lot. So we're going to make the format slightly different. We're going to have it be very conversational. All the panelists up here are direct advertisers, which is different than having, a vendor up here. So I think we can go into a lot more interesting discussion. I'll start off the first question, which is how do you use data to discover the optimal channel mix to ensure high LTV? And I'll let maybe Jennifer start off.
Sure, yeah. Something that's really interesting that we look at is the retention rate by channel. Also, it's really just the core metrics like the average revenue per customer that we're seeing, et cetera. Something that is also really interesting is getting key insights for people who are loyal to your brand and getting key insights from that data. So for example, if you use Net Promoter Score, can you find any attributes that are similar across people who rate you really high, and how can you use that for marketing? I would also say we use an attribution model as well. So when we're talking about channel mix and where to invest our next dollar, it's really important to understand how the channels interact with each other based on frequency. Also identifying, for example, what channels do a better job of driving exclusive traffic. So meaning if that traffic wasn't there, another channel is not going to be, having that touch point and bringing it in. So, so that's what works for us.
So we leverage data like and analytics via Has Offers to track
Toon.
Toon. To track everything, some key metrics for us specifically, we're very revenue driven, so we look at things like average order value, repurchase rate, and obviously revenue overall. Those are kind of our key data points that we look to optimize campaigns. Yeah.
Same thing that they've said, looking at those key KPIs like retention and monetization, spender conversion. I think everybody in this room probably at this point is already familiar with lifetime value and the importance of it. But I think the difficulty with that is that it's a predictive model. So there's a lot of data that you need to get before you can really feel confident with LTVs. And so it's important to look at earlier indicators like retention and first-time spender conversion.
Are you guys doing attribution modeling or predictive analytics at this point? I know that retargeting, deeplinking, re-engagement has been something that has been emerging. I call it like late Q4, and it's kind of coming to the forefront now. How deep have you gone into your strategies, and kind of what's working for you?
think we were talking before the panel, the four of us were talking a lot about how it's getting more and more expensive to acquire new users. And as the cost of acquisition goes up, it's going to be really important to learn how to re-engage those users, right? And having a plan that really maximizes all the channels that are free, meaning your cross promotion, your push notes, your email, and then taking those users that you've still not been able to re-engage through those channels and then finding them on Facebook RTB with paid retargeting. So we were talking a lot about that, and I know you've had a lot of experience with retargeting.
Yeah, we've really kind of shifted our strategy as it relates to driving revenue from purely acquisition to more re-engagement and remarketing. To Raquel's point, these channels are oftentimes less costly, and it's that age-old idea that it's easier to retain than acquire new. So push notifications, highly targeted, highly relevant based on in-app actions. In our case, it could be an abandoned shopping cart. It could be that user's inactive, they haven't made a purchase in 45, 60 days. So leveraging push in that sense as well as email has been really, really key as far as generating revenue outside of pure acquisition channels. On the acquisition side, again, we're looking at nearly 2x in pricing from a CPI standpoint to where we were roughly last year at this time. So I think it's important to understand other ways to drive revenue outside of just buying installs.
Yeah, for us, it's a little bit different. We do use push notifications as well, but we're very careful to only send them when they're adding value or reminding a customer of a key date or action they need to take. So, for example, with SnapTax, we can remind someone when IRS e-file is open or when it's near the tax deadline, so that makes sense. But we're not trying to get people to, log in a bunch of times. We want them to have the best experience and be able to file their taxes seamlessly and accurately with us.
Yeah, how effective has push and email been for increasing LTV, and are you tying that back to analytics for specific events within the app?
I think it's important to make it really relevant to the user experience, right? A great example you gave us earlier, Jessica, was when Jennifer, when you were talking about when people have new babies or buy a house or get married and doing re-engagement around those events for them for tax purposes. And for us, it's really about the games, right? And what people are experiencing in the game, if they have new lives or if they have a daily reward to come back to, really giving people a reason to re-engage with your brand and not just trying to annoy them, right? And get them to come back for no good reason.
Yeah, I think to the point about LTV, the objective is to ultimately increase LTV, which gives you a little bit more, flexibility on bidding, right? So depending on what your KPIs are, we're very revenue driven, so we look at ROI from an in-day, 7-day, 30-day to kind of understand if we're going to break even over our time frame. But by leveraging these channels and actually increasing LTV and tracking that, you're able to bid a little bit more aggressively. And as far as measuring, to your question, we use a tool called Lean Plum. Shout out, Aaron's here somewhere, I think. But it's been a fantastic tool to actually track funnel conversion from a push. So you can see, beyond just opens, how many users actually made it through the funnel on a per push basis, in addition to running different A/B tests against control groups. So very, very, very useful.
Are you measuring your paid media different from your organic sources, and how is that looking for you?
Yeah, I think something that I found really interesting in onboarding has offers was that you can actually track your internal sources just like you do your paid sources. I think there's a lot of value in understanding how that performs and creating baselines. So what I mean by that is you can create an internal publisher for your PR team. So if your PR team does a press release about your app, you can actually include one of those tracking links to see how many people download your app from that press release, what they're doing in the app, etc. I think you can also, think about that for internal channels like PPC. So you can enable your search team to find out, okay, what keywords groups are doing a better job at driving installs and what's converting better. I think internal partner to me is also, your web team. So if you obviously have a website, you can put different tracking links on different pages to understand where the traffic is coming from and who's doing a better job of driving not only the install, but the conversion metrics that you set up beyond the install. So I found that was super valuable. One tip I would give is if you are going to set up internal publishers and has offers, to make sure you title it something with a unique parameter, like I think I used _internal, so that if you actually download all that data and want to be pivoting it and looking at it differently, it's easier once you have an identifier in there to easily sort it. But that was something that was kind of a surprise because we just onboarded has offers last year, so that was really cool when we got some great insights that I wasn't expecting. So I would definitely recommend doing that if you're not already doing it.
I think just to add to that too, ultimately you want to drive installs that have higher LTV than your organics as well. So it's good to use organics as kind of that benchmark of what you want to exceed, because you're paying for those users versus getting them for free, and you can also have more control over who those users are, right? You can really target, go after the segments that you think will monetize the best. And so ultimately, you want to look at your organic LTV separately from your paid, because you want your paid LTVs or your paid install LTVs to be higher. Because again, you can really control that and optimize and hopefully get to those users that are going to monetize the best.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we break out LTV from organic versus paid, and then paid by channel. So you look at the LTV, depending on what partner and/or platform you're running on, and organics typically have a higher LTV than paid. But yeah, the objective is ultimately to drive paid LTV at least on par, if not greater than organic.
How do you find value based on specific verticals? Is it really ROI focused or using some other measures?
I mean, yeah, for us, we're very much revenue driven. This idea of like CPI pricing or CPC or CPM is almost irrelevant for us. It's really understanding what your ROI goals are and bidding towards that. Like, does it back out? So, I'm still surprised that a lot of partners still ask, well, what's your CPI target? And it's kind of like, well, what are the quality of users you can actually give me, and are they buying? Because it is irrelevant. I think now the industry, we're starting to shift a little bit more towards understanding more of the downstream and post-install value. And so it's, thinking beyond the install or the CPI, thinking beyond the CPC, and focusing on ROI for us anyways is a key metric. Activations and things like that don't drive as much value. We're looking to drive bookings.
I think it's interesting too what you said about networks asking like, what's your goal CPI, right? And sometimes some networks can be so focused on delivering volume at that CPI that you're kind of looking at that they forget about the quality, right? So they're giving you a ton of installs, but it's just crap quality, and you're eventually going to cut that budget, or you're going to have to reduce those CPIs. So I think it's really important for all vendors to kind of keep that in mind, right? And remember, even if you're delivering really low volume, if it's extremely high quality, we can always go back for more and keep that budget going. So I think that's really important to move away from just delivering volume to really delivering quality.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just to echo what these girls said, definitely we'll continue to fund what's working, but I think, on the advertiser side or brand side, it's also our job to explain up front what our goals are, so that you guys can work with us and we can have those really strategic partnerships. So, it's going to differ by business model, but I think it's important. I don't really care the payment method that, we're working on, but it's really what actually converts for the goal that we are trying to achieve, whether it's getting someone to sign up or getting someone to actually file their taxes. So I think that's super important too, just really communicating what that goal is up front.
Are you, just to follow up on that question, are you tracking the same metrics, whether it's non-incent, organic, or incent? Are you measuring all the users the same way, or are you using different metrics?
Do you want me to go on that one? Okay, so we're using the same metrics, but it's a different strategy. So we're not, totally against doing incentivized campaigns. However, we have to figure out and make sure that there's inferred intent. So, for example, if we're incentivizing a download to get some, coins or whatever it may be, that's fine, but what I really care about is what do they do next? Do they test drive our app for SnapTax, for example? Do they actually take a picture and upload their W-2? If so, I mean, that's a really good indicator of, them not only engaging with our brand, but they're actually, learning about us and possibly going to use us when, maybe they hadn't heard about us before. So, I mean, I think I'm open to it, but it also has to back out. So I think the metrics are the same, and I don't expect them to, like incent versus non-incent, to behave the same. I expect it to behave differently, but if it can still back out close enough, then I'm okay running it.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, it's what are your objectives, right? I mean, we're not going to run a burst campaign to yield high quality converting users, right? It's more about app store visibility and gaining that kind of residual organics from the campaign. So although I would like to say the metrics don't change, ultimately they kind of do. Because you're not anticipating the same amount of ROI on a burst campaign. So it's really just comes down to what are your objectives and then expectations to your point.
So same metrics but different expectations, right? Yeah, that's the same for us. And I think we were talking about this earlier as well, about how bursting has changed so much in the past years. I think 2 years ago, probably, that's what everybody was doing, was trying to get in the top ranks, using a lot of Tapjoy. And now that's just changed a lot because, you don't see the same organic ratio when you go climb the ranks, and it's quite expensive, and you don't see the same quality and returns that you would with a long-term sustained campaign. And also it's not sustainable, right? You do a burst, and by definition it's a burst, so it's very short-lived. So again, I don't think any of us are necessarily against it, but you have to think beyond a burst, right? That's a very short-sighted, I think, strategy. So yeah.
I'm going to skip around the questions a little bit. As users continue to access content on multiple devices, what role does cross-platform marketing play in campaigns for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I think at the end of the day, we have a lot of opportunity to improve on how we measure. We work with some partners who are able to provide that cross-device information. And I think it becomes more and more important as customers expect that. I mean, they really expect brands to, communicate and be across different devices and have a seamless experience. So I think that's something that, we definitely can improve. I mean, I'd love to hear what you guys think too.
Just looking around the audience, I see everybody is at least on 2 devices, right? You see everybody on their laptops, on their iPhones, and some people on their iPads too. So I think it would be obviously just silly if us as marketers, we don't take that into account and realize that users have a cross-platform and cross-device experience. I think the tricky part, and I think you were alluding to this, Jennifer, is that kind of recognizing those users as a single user across device, right? And very few partners can help us do that, especially when you try to bridge that gap between desktop or laptop and mobile, just because the identifiers are so different. So I think that's tricky, but definitely crucial. And there's some solutions out there in the market, but I think accuracy becomes really difficult. We've definitely tested around, web to mobile, and I think it's still really nascent, and I think the industry has a little ways to go before we get there, at least when you're talking about those 2 platforms.
Yeah, I think Mixbook's actually pretty unique. So Mixbook has actually been around since 2006, purely a web play, highly customizable photo book creation. That's what makes it unique, right? You can do so much with it. When we decided to roll out Mosaic, we considered actually rolling out a Mixbook app, but it kind of went against the grain of what we wanted to build, which was something that is purely mobile, incredibly simple, leverages the mobile experience, meaning what is the maximum value we can provide in the least amount of steps? And that was why we built Mosaic. We didn't want to necessarily do cross-platform. We wanted to build specifically for the mobile experience, for the user on the go. And we see very little overlap actually between the 2 products. You can kind of view Mosaic as this 5-minute photo book experience, whereas Mixbook's maybe the 15-hour. and the overlap's quite small. So we are much more siloed in our approach, and so far it's working out really well.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit more to that. So for our business, we definitely are not just mobile. We obviously have the online desktop version as well. So, one strategy that, that I think is really useful is trying to find, I was telling these girls earlier, the lowest common denominator conversion metric that I can use, because something like a cost per install is not gonna, I can't compare that to other marketing channels that we have to assess, okay, if I have an additional dollar to spend, where am I gonna spend it? So I think, trying to figure out what that is. Like, so for us, in the app, when someone signs up, I can figure out what is our cost for, a new customer and compare that to other channels. But I think it only is meaningful if you also layer on the conversion metrics. So for example, I could say, what is the conversion from click to a new user sign up in the app versus if someone came in on a different channel online and did the same process. And then again, once you have those kind of base metrics that might not be your traditional metrics, but it gives you a good comparison. And then you can also look at, is someone more likely to come back and use us again and retain us next year if they came to us online versus through the app, et cetera. So, yeah, that's kind of what I've seen to work.
I think this is going to be our last question. Do you run different types of campaigns by device? Question number one. I'm going to make a combo question. How successful have partners been in tracking those questions, tracking those campaigns, and do you have different attribution windows for each device?
It's like a three-part question. So the first one was, do we do campaigns differently by device?
Yes.
I think in my personal opinion, you'd be smart to look at different devices differently, right? I think as a consumer, you think about your experience on your iPhone and your iPad, and you definitely have different behavior where, you tend to spend more money on a bigger screen on an iPad. So I think that, if you look at those metrics, if you look at LTV by device, you'll find that there's definitely a difference between phone and tablet. And I think we all know iPod is not the most valuable user. And then also on Android, just because there's so many tiers of devices, right? There's the really high-end devices, there's the lower-end devices, so you're really going to see a difference in user value. So I think it's smart to take different approaches depending on the platform and on the device. The second part was...
How successful have partners been able to track all that?
I think that's a tricky part, going back to the earlier question, right? Being able to identify those users as a single user and not as a different device, because there's a difference between a device ID and a user ID. So, it's definitely tricky. Some partners do it better than others. I don't think anybody has a perfect solution yet. And then the attribution window was the last one. I remember that one. And I think it helps a lot to have a partner like Tune, formerly known as Has Offers, to really help you get a full understanding of where your installs are coming from and also to duplicate those installs, right? Because the moment you're tracking installs in different silos, whether you're doing, I don't think anybody does this anymore, but direct network integrations, or if you're using different measurement partners, and you have these large attribution windows, you end up having partners that are all claiming the same installs, and the longer the attribution window, the higher chance of that. And then I think earlier we were talking about view through as well, so I don't know if one of you guys want to touch on that.
Sure, I'll just touch on the, depending on what channel, I think it's definitely makes sense to have a different attribution window. So since I work on affiliate as well, it makes sense to have a longer window when it's something like completing your taxes versus a view where that can be a much shorter window. So I think it really just depends on what your goal is and what you're measuring.
I think we're, over the quick question, what do you see as kind of some best practices or some advice that you think would be relevant for our audience?
Relevancy. Make it relevant. We've been hearing this a lot. Know your customer. By knowing your customer and leveraging, whether it's interest, demographic, location, data to actually send relevant messages at the right time. I think that I think that's king. That's really what's going to drive, I think, ultimately conversion and deeper engagement on mobile.
If I had to pick just one, I think I would say, optimize as granularly as you can. So not just at, paid installs versus organic, or not even just network A versus network B, but really go deeper than that. Look at the subsites, right? Where are those installs really stemming from? What's the very first source of that install? Because what you see a lot of times is maybe a network overall is delivering poor quality, but once you actually look at the subsite, you'll find that there's certain apps or sites that are delivering a ton of poor volume, and if you blacklist those and you really give a chance to the top performers, you can still find value in pockets of performance. Also looking at different channels and different geos, we've found that certain networks work great in France and not so great in the US, right? So really giving everything a chance and looking as detailed into the LTV as you possibly can. And likewise with Facebook and Twitter, looking at the segment level, because not all your target segments will monetize the same. So.
One piece of advice that I would give in setting up your campaigns and mobile app tracking is to definitely, even as a marketer, make sure you really understand what the default settings are. I ran into, a learning experience there where, really understanding what those default settings are to make sure that how you're counting things is actually how you want to compare it to other channels. So for example, for like a sign-in or someone who is creating an account, do you want to see the sign-in just the first time, or do you want to see it every time? Do you want to tag those differently? Just making sure that you're setting it up correctly from the beginning really helps out in measuring, and also the speed of how you can analyze your data. Especially for us, in a seasonal business, we need to get that data as fast as possible. I think mobile app tracking helps us a lot in getting that real-time data, but it's also us making sure that we're getting that back to our partners, and then making decisions and having those optimization levers. So the faster, the better.
I think that's it for the questions. I would just do a quick recap. If I were going to summarize some of the key points of the panel, I would say that, obviously, return on ad spend, driving value as much as you can out of your existing user base is something that we'll see over the next 3 to 6 months being a strategic focus for all companies in the space. That's probably one. Number two is I think you have to work really closely with your mobile app tracking company so that you have a tight partnership and setting the proper foundation for the data that you're collecting and utilizing. And I think that we're going to see a lot of innovation, I think, in this year for how re-engagement, retargeting, deep linking is being used effectively to drive down ad spend and increase LTV and ROI. Other than that, I think we have a couple minutes for questions, if there are any.
So that was really useful information. There are a lot of vendors here in the audience. If you had one feature or one product that you think is missing from your tool set as marketers, what would that be? What's missing in your measurement or sort of overall goals that you would like either a startup to build or one of your existing vendors to add to their product suite?
I think for me at least, and I know this is something that's really tough to tackle, so it's kind of on the wish list, but targeting, right? Better targeting. I think that the reason why everybody comes up here and when they're asked what's the best channel out there for you, everybody says Facebook, is because they just have such amazing targeting. You're really getting the right users. You know who you're getting. I think that most vendors out there, and I'm talking more about networks, we have a hard time figuring out who we're targeting. And then what I was talking about earlier where, if you bid more, all of a sudden they're bringing in additional publishers and additional subsites, and then your quality is changing, right? Because you hadn't vetted those. And so I think targeting, transparency of where the traffic's coming from, a lot of people are really scared about, being taken away and people doing direct deals. But I think a model like Chartboost is a perfect example of, you're not going to disappear just because you're empowering your advertisers to have transparency and to see where the traffic's coming from. In fact, it's going to help you deliver them better quality. So I think those would be my two asks: better targeting, better transparency.
Completely agree. And outside of acquisition, I guess, still trying to understand organic sources, what actually drives, like outside of seasonality, being able to have a fuller picture on where what are the real drivers in organics. It's still kind of a black box. So.
Yeah, and I would answer, I mean, as far as the tool, something that I would love to see improved, and it sounds like based off of this conference, it already has been, but something, that has area for improvement is the speed of matching up the cost data with the publishers and the networks that we work with the has offers data. So even though we're getting the has offers data in real time, it's a heavy lift to pull in all those different sources. And so I did one of the trainings yesterday, so it sounds like there's a couple of ways that we can improve that and also use some of maybe the API capabilities. I haven't checked it out too much yet, but improving the speed of how we can connect the cost data is going to be huge on making us, enabling us to make those decisions faster, like what they were saying.
I second that.
Coming soon, right, Peter?
So coming soon, let's see it.
I think there's a question about.
He gets the award for most questions asked.
There's been some talks lately that Facebook, which has been traditionally a great channel for acquisition, is becoming more challenging, less efficient, maybe more expensive, because obviously everyone's jumped on it. So two questions here. Have you observed that on your side? And second, have you got any experience with their new network on which there is not so much feedback, or they've made many announcements of network, I mean?
Yeah, I would say on Facebook, absolutely. I mean, it's twice as expensive as it was a year ago. Lookalikes aren't scaling and performing as great as they used to. It's increasingly competitive. So yeah, that Facebook as a platform is increasingly difficult to scale as fast as we were, I'd say, a year ago. New channels, I mean, Twitter's showing a lot of promise, but it's early days of Facebook, very hands-on. You have to really kind of tweak, manage, optimize campaigns, find those segments. But I think it's going to be the next big viable channel, scalable channel. To the targeting point. I mean, you can go so granularly. It's very beneficial.
I think video too is showing a lot of promise. Ad colony, Vungle, showing good quality, showing good inventory. So I think video is going to become even more important. But of course, Facebook and Twitter are going to expand their capabilities on that as well, which is exciting.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a good idea to test out other kind of tapped install models. So, obviously, we see a lot of success on Facebook, but we're also, testing out different models like, Yahoo Stream Ads and other areas that we can, see if we can get some good conversion. So,
I think one of the things you're going to see this year is the use of first-party data tied to big data on the back end to do more targeted buys. So, as we've seen maybe over the last year, CPI prices double. We haven't really seen LTVs improve dramatically. I think with the use of first-party data, you're going to see more targeted buys, and that will offset some of the issues of cost. So,
back to Facebook again. One of the questions I had was around precise interest targeting. And if you guys had any prior experience with it, and what some of the gotchas with that were.
Is it as like, how do we discover which precise interest for targeting?
Correct. Yeah.
Basically? Well, I mean, we do a lot of surveys, not a lot, but quarterly or so. So it's understanding, asking your existing customers, your high quality customers, the right questions to better understand what their interests, life moments, age, demographics, things like that, behavioral type information, and then leveraging that to create these new segments. Some of them is a little bit of a guessing game in some cases, and just seeing what works. But ultimately, you can infer, like for a photo book app, photography is a little bit too broad, but you can start to kind of hone in on things that might be related to photography, whether that be travel, adventure, specific photographers. So just kind of going in a little bit deeper, because if you do target too broadly, you don't really get a clear understanding of the value of that segment. If that answers your question.
I think that's it. I'd like a round of applause for our panelists.